The fighting in Greece drags on. The communists continue to face greater and greater odds, and even some of their most ardent supporters are beginning to waver. Is there a hope of victory, or are they simply marching towards a heroic death? It's time to find out. Today, the Greek Civil War ends. I'm Indy Neidell. Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost's Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we follow the wars that wouldn't end within a Cold World War. The beginning of the digital age, the atomic age, and the space age, when we began to replicate our minds electronically, gained the power to end our very existence as a species, and discovered that we can truly reach for the stars. Last time we were in Greece, we saw the government's national army embark on an anti-guerrilla campaign, but they couldn't maintain the initiative, and the communist democratic army counterattacked. They, however, were also unable to make much progress, and the front lines stalled. Behind the scenes, though, global political shifts tilted the scales heavily in favor of the government. So, 1948. What's been happening? The plan of the national army has changed to a more methodical one. We saw last time, when they aimed straight for the main Democratic Army bases, that communist units in their rear could cause mayhem by savaging towns and supply lines. Now they're thinking about a more gradual campaign to purge communist cells and sympathizers in central Greece before again focusing on their headquarters. Operation Dawn gets underway April 15th, with the army and police arresting huge numbers of pro-communist civilians in central Greece. The goal here is to deny the Democratic Army intelligence and potential new recruits before the main offensive operations get underway later in the spring. See, the government forces are finally learning, but they're not only learning in terms of overall strategy, they've also been developing their tactics and expanding their forces with US support. New mountain warfare units are being mixed into the army in preparation for clearing the communists out of their strongholds. A lot of these changes happen under the direction of a certain James Van Fleet, an American general with an impressive service record during the Second World War and a growing reputation in the post-war era. Just now, Van Fleet serves as head of the Joint U.S. Military Advisory and Planning Group, overseeing American aid to the growth and development of the government's national army. Van Fleet proved to be an exceptional commander who used American military aid effectively in re-equipping the GNA. He established a series of training centers that prepared Greek officers to lead their troops in battle. Equally significant was his influence on the order of battle, organization, and equipment of the Greek army. Under Van Fleet's direction, the Greek Army's Standard Field Division was designed for mountain warfare and armed with machine guns, pack artillery, and light mortars. Tanks were limited to mopping up operations, and a small number of motorized vehicles accompanied the GNA divisions. Most of the rest were assigned to supply units in the rear areas. Without the impediment of tanks, trucks, and heavy artillery, the GNA divisions were not restricted to roads and could expand their range of operations. He actually proves to be such an effective asset to the government that next year, 1949, the communists will send 18 assassins to Athens to have him killed. They will fail. Anywho, all this reorganization brings us to Operation Crown, scheduled for June 20th. The plan is to have the 1st and 9th Divisions advance from Nestorio and Konitsa, go around the main communist positions, and then block the border between Greece and Albania, cutting off a potential escape route, and then attack from the north. Meanwhile, the 2nd and 10th Divisions will move up and attack from the south, sandwiching the bulk of the Democratic Army between anvil and hammer, and annihilating them. The battle doesn't really go as expected though, and the communists have a lot more strength left than anyone on the government side thinks they do. Casualties for the National Army are heavy, and progress quickly grinds to a halt. British and American military observers note the low morale in the army and criticize the generals for only willingly engaging the communists when they have a massive advantage in air power and artillery. Basically, afraid to take them on man to man. As the National Army starts to make advances once again around August, the Democratic Army abandons their main base in the Gramos Mountains and hops over the border into Albania, which the government forces have been unable to completely cut off, and then they re-enter Greece to the northeast, taking up residence in their base in the Vitsi Mountains. With a lot of force now concentrated there, the Democratic Army goes on the offensive and attacks southwards towards Castoria and Ptolemaida in September and October. Although they fail to capture the cities themselves, a lot of the surrounding countryside and villages falls to the communists, and 2 brigades of the National Army are routed from the area. So 1948 starts to wind down, with both sides relatively spent after a bloody fight which has lasted all summer. The government needs to rebuild the National Army's failing morale, which has flatlined as the war has dragged on without a clear victory despite their superiority in numbers and equipment. For the communists, morale is slightly better, but each operation costs them the lives of what are irreplaceable fighters. It seems to be only a matter of time now until their reckoning comes. Over in Athens, though, things have been as chaotic as up there in the mountains. On May 1st, 1948, Minister of Justice Christos Ladas is assassinated in Athens by a member of the KKE, Communist Party, security wing. While leaving the Church of St. George, a hand grenade is thrown through the window of his car, leaving him with injuries that ultimately turn out to be fatal. Efthymios Moutsoyannis is formally charged with the crime and goes on trial with 8 accomplices in June. The retribution of the government comes quickly. Government executions of convicted communists increased to such a point that they aroused protest from both Britain and America and other foreign countries too. The Greek government admitted that since December 1944, 2,961 persons had been sentenced to death for murder with their own hands, of whom 157 were executed up until May 1st, 1948. Between May 4th and 9th, another 61 people were executed. A close surveillance was kept on all communists and those suspected of left-wing activities. All were now drafted into the armed forces, and those of doubtful reliability were sent to Makronissos Island for screening. Those who would not repudiate the communist revolution were retained there. We saw last time out what awaits these deportees on Makronissos, so if you missed that, go check it out. In terms of a broader response, the government declares a state of emergency, suspending civil liberties such as freedom of the press and freedom of assembly. And importantly, the principle of habeas corpus is also suspended, meaning the government security forces are no longer required to justify the detention of anybody in custody or bring them before a court, effectively allowing them to permanently detain anybody for any offense, real or imagined. On the communist side, ideological policing ramps up too, especially as the ranks get flooded with newer, inexperienced, often forcibly conscripted recruits who aren't quite as keen on this whole civil war thing as the old guard are. Discipline begins to fracture, and loyalty is enforced with an iron fist. Despite that, though, many of them, including some of the more experienced veterans, are deciding simply to, well, leave. A lot of them first joined up with the Democratic Army's predecessor Elas back during World War II, with the aim of liberating and defending their homes and their local communities. But now, as I said last time we covered Greece, the communists are trying to reform their forces into a regular army and abandoning their traditional partisan strategies. For a lot of the fighters, this just is not what they signed up for. And communist leader Nikos Zachariadis is really overestimating these guys' commitment to his vision of a communist Greece as opposed to simple desire for survival. So lots of those who can, those who believe they will be safer back in their hometowns, just, shrug their shoulders and leave. Zachariadis responds to the military and personal setbacks in a measured and sensible way, by arbitrarily sacking the Democratic Army's leader, who many considered to be its best general, Markos Valantis. Valantis presented his platform to the KKE Politburo, which was critical of Zachariadis' military direction. Valantis emphasized the necessity of returning to intensive guerrilla-type activity by small, mobile, lightly armed contingents, saboteurs and snipers, able to choose where and when to fight. This alternative strategy failed to impress the KKE leadership. On the 15th of November 1948, Zachariadis succeeded in securing Politburo support in denouncing Valantis as a defeatist. To maintain morale, the Politburo announced the party sent him away to recover from a mysterious ailment. There's also a change in leadership on the government side, although this one is a little less stupid. After a great deal of political shenanigans and maneuvering, none of which I have time to go into today, new-ish Prime Minister Themistokles Sophoulis' government bring the veteran general Alexandros Papagos out of retirement to become commander-in-chief of the National Army. He will take command in January. The stage is set then for 1949. Right now, as the year gets going, the Democratic Army has a very delicate problem. See, I mentioned that a lot of the older members from the Greek heartlands are leaving to return home. And of course, a lot more of them have met their end in battle. Well, just because of where the forces are currently positioned, a growing number of their troops are locally recruited Macedonians. You'll remember from episodes 1 and 2, the Macedonian issue is a particular problem for the communists, one which has plagued them since the 1920s. And it's also a big issue for Yugoslav leader Josip Broz Tito, who remains the Greek communist biggest provider of aid, since he has dreams of adding parts of ethnically Slavic Macedonia to his own nation. Well, this issue rears its head one final time, this time fatally for the communists. On January 31st, 1949, Zachariadis announces that after their inevitable victory, let's not unpack that delusion right now, but after that victory, Slavic Macedonians in Greece would be granted independent statehood. He does this to incentivize the men that now make up a big portion of his forces, but it has immediate effects. The popularity of the KKE and the Democratic Army, where it still exists, plummets, and Tito, who sees this as a threat not only to his ambitions, but also as a potential destabilizing force in Yugoslav Macedonia, cuts off all support. And on July the 10th, closes the border entirely. Some aid does keep trickling in from communist states through Albania, but it's an entirely different order of magnitude to what they've now lost. Nevertheless, it was the Democratic Army who began 1949 on the offensive. Even before the Macedonia thing, they've managed to attack and capture the city of Naousa, which happens on January 13th. They execute the mayor, the manager of a textiles mill, and a bunch of pro-government civilians blow up a hospital, forcibly recruit about 650 new fighters, many of them basically children, and then retreat to the mountains before government reinforcements can respond. Loads of those new recruits predictably break ranks and run back home the first chance they get. I'd like to be able to tell you what the thinking behind those atrocities was, whether it was intended as the beginning of a terror campaign to shake the morale of the National Army, or whether it was just lashing out in fury one final time, but I honestly don't know what they meant to achieve there. All they do accomplish is giving the government a colossal propaganda victory and alienating those who do still believe in the revolution. In February, they try an assault against the town of Florina, hoping to seize it and hold it, allowing them access to fresh manpower and supplies. The Democratic Army deploys 7,000 troops plus artillery to take the city, the biggest force they've fielded since the beginning of the fighting. There's a bit of a snag with this one though. Their intelligence has failed them. Inside the town is virtually a whole division of the National Army, 8,000 strong. The attack doesn't even make it to Florina before being turned back with heavy losses. Things go a little bit better in April, and the Democratic Army manages to recapture the Gramos Mountains after a diversionary attack pulls government forces out of Konica. But it's not gain or loss of territory that is going to decide this war. It's manpower. See, the communists are losing around 4,000 troops a month in these spring offensives and government counterattacks. About half of those killed in action. How many are they managing to conscript per month to fill the gap? By mid-1949, less than 200. There are now only around 13,000 of them left, and they face a reformed and expanded National Army of around 230,000 plus air power. In April, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin reaches out to representatives from Britain and America, suggesting the three countries come together to mediate a peace deal in Greece and put an end to the civil war. For Britain and America, though, there's really no reason to entertain this idea. The Democratic Army is on the verge of collapse, and the Soviets aren't going to intervene, that much is clear, so they reject the idea outright. By August, Greece has been all but cleared of major communist strongholds, and only the Gramos and Vitzi mountains remain. Operation Pyrsos, or Torch, the final operation of the war, gets underway August 2nd. The mountains are saturated with napalm dropped from American-built dive bombers as tens of thousands of government troops, backed by tanks, comb what's left, rooting out any stragglers. The Vitzi mountains fall first, and those who can flee across the border into Albania. Some re-enter Greece at Gramos for a final stand, but it's pretty much pointless. Another 2,000 communists die at Gramos, with a similar number captured, compared to only 500 dead on the government side. With that, the Greek Civil War is over. There's no big peace agreement like at Varkitsa years earlier, no mediated settlement between parties, just a complete military victory for the government. On the 16th of October 1949, the insurgents' radio station announced a temporary halt to the fighting in order to prevent the destruction of Greece. The voice of the KKE then proclaimed that the Democratic Army of Greece had not given up, as it was forced to back down only temporarily due to the material advantage of the Athens government and Tito's treachery. A few isolated pockets of resistance continued throughout the fall, and the Greek Civil War sputtered to an end. A little later, Soviet ships steamed into the harbors of Albania and collected the remnants of the Democratic Army. Zachariadis himself is one of those escapees. He flees to Romania before making his way to the Soviet Union, where he continues to pretend to lead the Democratic Army as some sort of government in exile. In reality, of course, the war is over, this time likely for good. Many soldiers of the Democratic Army and their families settle across the Eastern Bloc. Back in Greece, even as the state of emergency is eased and some civil liberties begin to return, the lasting effects of the conflict show themselves to be seared into Greek politics. The Civil War has claimed the lives of around 15,000 Greek government soldiers and nearly double that number of communist troops. With civilian deaths, the total number of dead may very well exceed 100,000. It is unlikely we'll ever know the true number. Things will not quite go back to the way they were. A right-wing monarchist outlook is embedded deeply into the government now, not just in parliament, but in the civil service, the government institutions, the police. It may take some decades for leftist or even centrist politics to return. And the passion and the anger of the period will no doubt drive Greek politics for a long time to come. For Britain and the USA, a victory. It may seem to be a small one in the world right now, but the USSR may very well have just been denied any hope of strong influence across the Mediterranean. Greece, and perhaps Turkey too, may become established as bastions of Western influence on Stalin's doorstep. How will this affect European security moving forwards? Well, stay with us and find out here on War to War. Today, I want to give a big shout out to Valantis Athanasiou, who has worked with us off and on for quite some time, as any long-term viewers will know. He is Greek himself, if you couldn't guess from the name. Some really good English language sources exist on the war that we've used extensively, but the sordid details of the fighting are only really available in Greek scholarship. His help with research has enabled us to bring you this series on Greece in more depth than you are going to find in at least 99% of English language stuff. So show your appreciation for him in the comments. And hey, since you're enjoying War to War, then join the TimeGhost army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Maybe with your help, we'll even be able to make War 3 War. Who knows? It's all Greek to me. I did go there. Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. Well, our TimeGhost army member of the week is Ovidius. And do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.